We as a Spring Boot developers, many times we build lot of REST APIs inside our web application, our microservices applications. And the primary reason why we are developing these REST APIs is so that the developers from other applications like front-end application or mobile application or some third-party vendor developer, they can interact with our back-end web application or microservice application. Think of a scenario where on a Friday evening, you completed the development of all your REST APIs and you deployed your code into the QA environment and you inform the third-party vendor or the UI application developer or mobile developer that they can start consuming your REST APIs. And you close your laptop and you went to your home on Friday evening, assuming that you'll have a great weekend. But unfortunately, you have many emails coming into your inbox asking a lot of questions from other developers like, how do I consume your REST APIs? What is the request format? What is the response format? What are the validations that you enforce? All these questions will be very obvious because if you simply say them that you build REST APIs, that is not going to make any sense and you're going to get a lot of questions. So to overcome these kind of challenges, there are multiple approaches. The most basic approach is you document everything about your REST APIs manually inside a Word document and you send the same document to all the developers who are consuming your REST APIs. But there are a lot of problems with this approach. One is there is no consistency. You may build the documentation of your REST APIs using your own style. And similarly, the other project developer, they can follow different style. So eventually there is no consistency. And whenever there is a change inside your REST APIs, definitely you need to send the updated documentation to all the consumers. So this is all cumbersome process and there is a drawback here. That's why inside this video, we are going to learn on how to document our Spring Boot REST APIs with the help of OpenAPI specification and Swagger. I hope you understand what is the agenda of this video and the problem that we are trying to solve. So let's jump into the details right away. To explain on how to document our REST APIs with the help of OpenAPI and Swagger, I have a Spring Boot Maven application here with the name accounts. Inside this Spring Boot web application, I have a controller with the name accounts controller, and inside this accounts controller, I have 4 different methods supporting the CRUD operations inside my web application. With the help of these 4 REST APIs, I can create a bank account inside my web application. I can fetch the existing account details, and similarly, I can also update existing account details, and at last, I can also delete the account details inside my web application. I'm not going very in detail about what this web application does. I'm going to upload this Spring Boot web application into a GitHub repo, and the same I'm going to mention inside the description of the video. Please refer to the web application for more details what these REST APIs are doing. But on a high level, right now we have 4 REST APIs, and if I deploy this web application to any cloud environment, definitely anyone can start consuming my REST APIs. But whenever they want to consume my REST APIs, they'll have hundreds of questions about the behavior of my REST APIs. What is the request format? What are the validations that I have? What is the response format? To answer all these questions and to make my life easy as a developer, I can document my REST APIs. How to do that? Don't worry, it's not a big job. It's a very, very easy job with the help of existing libraries that we have. If you can go to the website with the name springdoc.org, inside this website, there are details on how to document our REST APIs with the help of OpenAPI and Swagger. I'll get to the point what are OpenAPI and Swagger, but let's try to understand how to document our REST APIs. Inside this website, if you can scroll down, there is an introduction about this library, what this library is going to help. So this library is going to help you to automate the generation of API documentation using Spring Boot projects. So that's what we are trying to learn here. And if you can scroll down, there is an maven dependency that you can mention inside your Spring Boot web application to document your REST APIs. So whenever you add this maven dependency, internally, your Spring Boot will have all the libraries related to documenting REST APIs and it will also have an Swagger UI, which will help you to view all the documentation of your REST API. But please make a note that whatever dependency that we have here, this dependency will work for the Spring Boot web application which are using a version which is less than Spring Boot 3. But since I build a Spring Boot web application with the version 3.1.0, this dependency is not going to work. So if you can scroll up here again, so here there is an important note, like for Spring Boot version 3, we need to use this springdoc-openapi version 2. So let me click on this link. So you can see as soon as I click, a new link appeared, and inside this link there is a v2 which indicates version 2 is mentioned inside the URL. Now if we can scroll down here, there is a maven dependency that is available. So let me take this maven dependency. After copying this value, I'm going to mention the same inside the pom.xml of my web application. So here I need to open the pom.xml. Inside my pom.xml, I'm going to mention this new library just after my Actuator dependency. And once I add this new dependency, I'm going to load the maven changes. Once the libraries are downloaded, I'm going to do a maven build. Once a build is completed, I'm going to start my web application in the debug mode. So let's wait for a couple of seconds to get my web application get started. My web application is going to start at a default port 8080, and it is using the internal H2 database to store all the data that I'm going to save inside this web application. Now my web application started. And you may have a question here like, where can I see the documentation details of my REST APIs? Like I said before, whenever you add these maven dependency, you are also going to get a Swagger UI component inside your Spring Boot web application. So you need to access a URL inside your web application against your port 8080. So in order to view the REST API documentation details, you need to open a URL inside your browser. The URL that I have to open here is localhost 8080 because I started my web application at the port 8080, and post that swagger-ui index.html. As soon as you enter, you can see there is a beautiful Swagger UI available inside your web application, which can be accessed by anyone, and they can try to understand what are all the REST APIs available inside your web application. And if you can see here at the servers, the server where it is deployed is mentioned like localhost 8080. This is the context path of this server, and using this root path, they can invoke all my REST APIs. And the total number of REST APIs that I have inside my web application are 4, supporting get method, post method, put method, and delete method. So that's why you're able to see 4 different REST APIs. So this is the API path to update the accounts information. Similarly, this is for create. Similarly, this is for fetching the account details. And at last, we also have an API that help to delete the account details. Suppose as a UI developer or mobile developer who is trying to consume these REST APIs, if I want to understand what is the request format, what is the response format for a particular REST API, I can click any of these APIs. So for this create API, you can see this is how the request body I'm going to accept. Inside my request body, I'm accepting a JSON with the fields name, email, mobile number, and inside this JSON, I'm also going to have an embedded object with the name accounts.to, and inside that I have fields like account number, account type, and branch address. If someone is trying to send a request to my REST API, they need to make sure that they are following this structure with the same field names, and the format that I'm going to support is JSON format. And very similarly, when they invoke these API as a response, they are going to get a 200 response code whenever the operation is successful, and the response will contain 2 fields with the name, status code, and status message. And here you may have a question like how all this information is being populated inside this documentation based upon my REST APIs. So let's try to understand the same. If you can go to the account controller, for example, for this create API itself, we are accepting a object with the name customer DTO, and inside this object we have fields like name, email, mobile number, and accounts DTO, and inside this accounts DTO we have account number, account type, and branch address. So the same request structure is getting converted into the documentation here. And very similarly, if you try to understand the response, here the return object of this REST API is response.dto, and inside this response.dto, I have two fields with the name status code and status message. I hope this is clear. Similarly, if you can open other REST APIs, you will have details about the request structure, response structure. And towards the end of this page, there will be also schema information, like what are the different schema objects that my REST APIs are going to support. If you can recall, our create API is going to accept a schema object with the name customer DTO. If someone want to know more details about customer DTO, they can click on this. Here under this customer DTO schema, there will be details like what are the fields, whether they are mandatory or not, what is the data format that they are going to support. If you can see, the name is a mandatory field. That's why we are able to see this red asterisk. And the data type that it is going to support is string. It also has validations like min length and max length. So all this information comes from your Pojo classes. Here, if I try to open this customer DTO, I have all these annotations which are available inside the Jakarta validation API. So based upon these annotations, my REST API documentation can be derived. Like whenever we mention this not empty, that means it's a mandatory field. And similarly, there is a size restriction I have, and since it is a string data type, the same information is being displayed inside the documentation. So you can see, just by adding a single maven dependency, I'm able to provide most of the information to the developers who are trying to consume my REST APIs. And with this, I'm able to answer most of their questions. But you can see here, there is still a room to improve the documentation. So this information is coming based upon the controller class that I have. And there is no summary and description about what these REST APIs are going to do. There is no metadata information that will help my developers who are trying to consume my REST APIs. So to provide all this good to have information inside my documentation, I can use some annotations that are available inside the SpringDoc library. Using those annotations, we can mention the summary description of our APIs or any other metadata information that will help the developers. So let's try to understand what are those annotations. We can mention those annotations, and we can also validate how that information is being reflected inside this Swagger UI page. The very first nice to have information that we can provide inside our documentation is what is the purpose of these REST APIs? Why do someone has to consume these REST APIs? In case if they find any issues, to whom they need to contact. All this kind of metadata information about all our REST APIs we need to document somewhere inside our Spring Boot web application so that the same will be displayed inside our OpenAPI specification. For the same, we can go to the Spring Boot main class, which is accounts application. And this is the main class inside my Spring Boot because you're able to see an annotation with the name @SpringBoot application. Here on top of this class, I'm going to mention an annotation which is OpenAPI definition. And to this annotation, first I'm going to invoke the parameter which is info. To this info parameter, I need to pass all the information about my REST APIs. For the same, I'm going to mention an annotation which is info just after this info parameter. And to this info annotation, we're going to pass multiple parameters. The very first information is what is the title. Using this title, I'm going to mention a title to my REST APIs. So the title that I want to mention here is Accounts Microservice REST API Documentation. Post that, the next information that I can mention here is description. So to this description, I can provide more details about my REST API. With the title, I'm just giving a summary of my REST APIs. Whereas with the description, I can try to provide more details. So here I'm just mentioning some description saying that EasyBank accounts microservice REST API documentation. But in real projects, you can mention all the business details about your REST APIs. Post this description, we can also mention the version. Since I'm building the very first version, I'm going to mention V1. If you're trying to enhance your REST APIs in future, you can keep incrementing this version so that your consumers can understand what is the version of REST APIs that right now they are consuming. Similarly, we can also mention the contact details using the contact parameter. Against to this contact parameter, I'm going to invoke the contact annotation. Using this contact annotation, I can mention all the contact details that someone can contact in case of any issues. You can see to this contact annotation, I'm mentioning what is the name, what is the email, what is the URL that someone can try to contact in case of any issues. So we are trying to put our best efforts to provide all the documentation. Definitely there will be some issues, there will be some questions to the consumer. So in such scenarios, they can try to send an email or they can try to contact using this name, email, and URL details. Once we mention all these contact details, we can also mention license details. Sometimes we develop REST APIs and we want to enforce some licensing restrictions. Whether my REST APIs is open source and anyone can consume, or my REST APIs are for commercial usage. So all those license details I can mention with these license parameter available inside the OpenAPI definition annotation. To provide more details about license, we need to use an annotation which is @license. And to this license annotation, we can pass what is the name of the license and what is the URL from where all the license information can be read by the consumers. For now, I'm just mentioning my own URL, which is eazybytes.com. But in real projects, you need to mention your own licensing information URL. And after this info information, we can also pass the external documentation detail. In case if the consumers, they want to understand more about my business and more about my REST APIs, and if this information is available inside a external documentation, then I can mention all those details here with this external documentation annotation. To this annotation, I can pass the information like description and URL. Like you can see, I'm just mentioned some dummy description and URL. This way, I have mentioned some metadata information about my REST APIs. Using this information, anyone can get a basic summary or description about my REST APIs. And if they have more questions, they can reach out to these contact details, and similarly, they can also refer these external documentation and license information. So let me save these changes, do a build. Since I have DevTools inside my pom.xml, I don't have to restart my web application. So let me go to the browser. So here, as of now, you can see this header part is empty. As soon as I refresh, all the information that we mentioned will appear here. So this is the title that we have mentioned, and this is the description, and these are the contact details, and very similar, this is the license information, and this is the external documentation information. So all this information is applicable for all these REST APIs that we have here. But apart from sharing this common information to the consumers, we may also want to share more details about individual REST APIs. So to provide extra information about our REST APIs, we can also mention some annotation along with the metadata information inside the respective Java methods of Spring Boot web application. So let's go to the accounts controller. So here I have accounts controller, and similarly inside real projects, there might be hundreds of controller classes with various REST APIs. First, I need to mention basic information about the REST APIs that I have inside this controller. For the same, we are going to invoke an annotation which is @tag. Using this @tag, we can pass the information like what is the name. To this name, I'm passing the information like CRUD REST APIs for accounts in EasyBank. And post that, we can also mention what is the description. To this description, I'm passing the details like CRUD REST APIs in EasyBank to create, update, fetch, and delete account details. So these are all some basic information that I'm trying to mention here. But in your real project, please mention whatever details that make sense to you. After this information, if I try to do a maven build and go to the browser, as of now, you can see it is showing as accounts controller, but as soon as I refresh, you'll be able to see all the information that we have mentioned with the help of name and description. Now, after this information, we should also mention some basic information about our REST API operations. For the same, let's go to the Java methods. The very first Java method that I have here is create account, and this is going to support the path which is /API/account/create. So to share more details about this individual operation, I can mention annotations on top of this Java method. The annotation that we need to mention here is @operation, because this is an individual operation supported by my REST API. To this operation annotation, we can pass the summary about this operation like create account REST API is a summary, and very similarly we can also pass what is the description. Under this description we can mention more details about our operation, like REST API to create new customer and account inside EasyBank. Once we provide this summary and description using this operation annotation, we can also mention another annotation which is API response. Using this API response we can pass what is the response code that we are going to return for this particular REST API. Since this is a create operation, we are going to return 201, and similarly we can also pass more details with the help of this description. So here under this description I'm mentioning what is this 201 indicates. So the 201 indicates HTTP status created, which means the account details are created successfully behind the scenes. Very similarly, we can try to mention this operation and API response for the remaining Java methods. So here just about this fetch account details Java method, I'm going to paste the code related to @operation and @API response. So here you can see this information related to this particular REST API, which is fetch. So this is the summary, this is the description, and the response code for this will be 200, which means HTTP status okay. Let's do the same for the third method that we have, which is update account details. To this method also I'm pasting the code to save some time here. So using operation annotation, I'm mentioning what is the summary and description. Here if you can see there is a new information. Sometimes we may want to share the documentation about all the different kind of API responses that my end developer can expect. In case of successful scenario, what is the API response that they're going to get? In case of failure scenario, what is the response that they're going to get? So all such multiple API response information we can mention inside the annotation API responses. So this is a plural form of API response, and inside these API responses, using this curly brace, we can mention multiple API response which are separated by comma value. So this is a new change that I have done for this third method, and you can see response code 200 indicates okay, and similarly 500 means there is some internal server error happened, which indicates there is an exception. And at last we have fourth method, which is delete operation. So let's try to mention the details for the same. To this method also I'm going to mention what are the operation details, what are the API responses details. So I hope you're clear. Now let me save these changes, do a build. Once the build is completed, we can go to the browser. So as of now, you can see there is no information about all my REST APIs. There is only basic information. But as soon as I refresh my web page, you can see after my each REST API, there is a summary, there is a description, and along with that, under the responses, you can see there are various response code that this API operation is going to return. 200 indicates okay, and this is how it is going to look like. And 500 means there is an internal server error, and this is how it is going to look like. We can also validate the same for other APIs like for fetch. So this is the summary, this is the description, and under the responses, this is the code that we are going to send. And this is how the response is going to look like. This is super. We have provided good amount of details about our REST APIs. After these REST APIs, we also have schema documentation. Like you can see, by default, this name is coming from the Java class names that we have, like accounts DTO, customer DTO, response DTO. But these names are not looking good because inside the documentation, we should never talk about the technical details. We should give a name which is apt based upon the business. So that's why these details also we can change, or we can also share more details about our schema by providing some annotations inside our Java Pojo class. So let's try to explore the same. For the same, first I'm going to open the customer DTO Pojo class. Inside my customer DTO class, I'm going to invoke an annotation which is @schema. Using this schema annotation, I'm going to pass two basic details. The very first information is what is the name that I want to display inside my documentation. The name that I want to display is customer, but not the customer DTO. So that's why I'm giving the name as customer. Post that, I can also mention description. Inside this description, I can mention more details about what this schema is going to hold, what kind of information it is going to hold so that it will be more clear to the consumers. So here I just mentioned the description as schema to hold customer and account information. So this whatever schema information that we have mentioned here is applicable for this entire class. So let me save these changes. After this, we can also mention more details about our fields as well. So just about our field, I can mention the same annotation, which is schema. Using this schema, I can provide more details with the help of description. Under this description, I'm mentioning the details as this field is going to hold the name of the customer. And after this, I can also provide example information. Examples are going to help my end user. What is an example value that they can provide? Suppose if they're not clear about what kind of information that they need to send inside a particular field, with the help of this example, they can easily identify what kind of information that they can send or what kind of information that this field is going to accept. So here the example value that I want to mention is some random name, which is eazybytes. So with this information, we should be good, but please make sure you are not mentioning any name details, because if you mention some name details, then whatever name that you have mentioned against this parameter, the same is going to be displayed to the consumer. And if they send the request with that field value, it is not going to work, because when they're sending the JSON information, the field names should exactly match with what we have inside the Pojo class. So that's why please make sure you're not providing a different field name inside this name parameter. So I'm deleting this. You can see as of now under this name, there is no example value, but when we do a build and refresh the browser, there'll be an example value that will come. I'll show you in few seconds. So now let me mention the same schema details for all the fields that I have inside this Pojo class. Here just above the email field, I'm mentioning schema details like this is the description, which is email address of the customer and what is an example value. And very similarly for mobile number also we can mention. Here under the mobile number, you can see I mentioned the example as it is going to support only 10-digit mobile number. That's why I have given a sample 10-digit value, accounts only. And at last, we can also mention schema details on top of this accounts DTO. You can see I'm overriding the name to accounts instead of accounts DTO, and this is the description. Here, you may have a question like, just now I said on top of the fields, don't override the name, but here on top of this, I'm overriding the name to account. The reason it is still going to work is, this is an object name. The object name can be anything inside the JSON, but the field names has to exactly match with what we have inside the Pojo class. So that's why even though I have mentioned the name as account and I'm trying to override this name, till my JSON mapping is going to work without any issues. After making these changes, we can go to the accounts DTO. Here first we can mention some schema details on top of the class. So here the details that I have mentioned is what is the name that I want to consider. So I'm just trying to override from accounts DTO to accounts. And this is the description about this schema. After this, let's try to mention the schema details individually on all the Java fields. So here I'm just mentioning what is the description of my account number. I'm not going to provide any example value. Next, we can mention the details on top of account type. Here you can see this is the description and I have mentioned an example value which is savings. Now coming to the branch address, we can mention the schema details again here also. So the description that I want to mention for this field is EasyBank branch address. We are good with these DTO. Now we can also update similar information inside the response DTO, which we are going to return as part of response. So first, let me mention the schema details on top of the Java class. So these are the details that I want to mention, like this is the description which saying this is the schema to hold successful response information. Now on top of the status code, I'm going to mention the schema details. So this is the schema details and an example status code can be 200. Similarly, we can mention the details for status message as well. So I'm just mentioning the details here. So with this, we should be good. Let me save the changes, do a build, and I'm going to refresh the browser page. Before that, let's try to see how the existing information is looking like. Like for customer DTO, this is how it is going to look like. So if I try to refresh this page, very first important change that I want you to observe here is the names are very apt right now. Instead of technical names, we are using the business names with the help of schema annotation that we have defined inside the Pojo class. If I can open this customer schema object, you can see there is a description that is right now appearing here. And if I can open any of the Java field, apart from basic meta details, I'm also mentioning what is the description about this field and example value. The same example values will also populate inside all the places where you're trying to refer these customer schema. Suppose for the create API, we are referring the same schema object with the name customer, and you can see all the example values are populated here. This way, my consumer, they also have some test data which they can use to test the REST APIs. So similarly, for email also, we have description and example values, and under accounts, all the details are also updated with what we have mentioned inside the schema. Similarly, you can also check for response as well. The same works for accounts as well. So this way we have enhanced this documentation by just using few annotations inside our Spring Boot web application, and all the work that we have done is not a super complex. This is very simple in nature, and all the heavy lifting is being done by the springdoc-API. Apart from REST APIs that we develop inside our Spring Boot web application, there might be REST APIs exposed by the Spring Actuator library. We can also provide the documentation of our Actuator REST APIs inside the Swagger UI as well. For that, first make sure the Actuator is enabled inside your web application. I have already added Actuator related libraries inside my web application. And if I try to invoke these localhost 8080/Actuator, you can see these are all the REST APIs that are supported by my Actuator. But this information by default will not appear inside the Swagger UI. In case if you want them also to be appear inside this Swagger UI, you just need to mention a property inside your application.yaml file. Here inside my project, I'm going to open the applications.yaml. And inside this YAML file, I'm going to add a new property with the value springdoc-show-actuator true. With these changes, now my Actuator related API documentation also will be available inside the Swagger UI. So let me save these changes, do a build. I'm trying to refresh here. As soon as I refresh, you will be able to see my Actuator REST APIs information as well. So let me close these accounts related REST APIs, and you can see these are all the Actuator related APIs. The most famous one that we usually invoke is Actuator/health. If I can open, you can see this is not going to accept any parameters, but it is going to return a response with the description OK and status score 200. And one more advantage with this Swagger UI is you can also test your APIs from this page itself. Suppose if I try to click on this try it out, there will be a button which is execute will appear. In case if your API needs some input data, the data fields will appear here. Since this API is not accepting any input data, everything is empty. I can straight away click on this execute button. You can see here, as soon as I click execute button, I got an response with the response body which is up, and these are the response headers. This is the code that I receive. And in case if you want to invoke this REST API using a curl operation, this is the command that you need to invoke, and this is the request URL that you need to invoke. So all this kind of information will appear on this Swagger UI. Once you've done testing this, you can click on this clear, and if you can click on this cancel, again the try it out button will appear. Similarly, let's go and test one more API here, which is /actuator/beans. When I invoke this API, it is going to return all the beans created inside my Spring Boot web application. You can see these are all the beans that are created inside my Spring Boot web application. What is the scope of this bean? What is the class type of the bean? So all the details are available inside the response body. So this is the beauty of Swagger UI. I hope you are liking this Swagger UI. But sometimes you may ended up in a scenario, though you have enabled the Swagger UI documentation inside your Spring Boot web application, the third-party vendors, they may not be able to access your Swagger UI page because this URL or the deployment where you have done, maybe it is behind a firewall, and third-party vendors or other consumer developers, they may not be able to access your Swagger UI. For such scenarios, what you can do is you can simply click on this small link that you have, which is API docs, As soon as you click, you will get a JSON response. You just need to copy this JSON response and share the same to the consumer developers or third-party vendors. By taking this JSON response, they can easily try to understand your REST APIs with the help of a tool called Swagger Editor. So let me go to the Swagger website. Inside the Swagger website, under these tools, we have Swagger Editor. If you can click on that, the Swagger Editor webpage will appear, and here you can click on this Try Swagger Editor button. You can see as of now, there is a default OpenAPI specification provided by the Swagger team, which you can refer as a reference. This is the OpenAPI specification on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, this is how it is going to look like. You can always refer this OpenAPI specification if you have any doubts. So now we have shared this JSON with the consumer developers. They can take this JSON and simply copy this inside the Swagger editor. As soon as they paste the JSON value, they'll get an option to convert the JSON into YAML. As soon as someone click on this OK, you can see all our REST API documentation details will be populated on the right hand side. This way you're trying to solve a problem where the consumers, they are not able to access your Swagger UI that you have deployed as part of your Spring Boot web application. I hope this is clear. Now at last, I want to give details about what is the difference between OpenAPI specification and Swagger. Because many times you might be hearing these OpenAPI specification and Swagger getting used interchangeably, but there is a clear difference between them. OpenAPI specification is an open source community where they build the specifications to document the APIs. When I say specification, the OpenAPI team, they are going to define all the standards about how the elements look like inside a specification, what is the skeleton, what is the format. And based upon these specifications, Swagger, they built a lot of open source tools and commercial tools. So you can see here, Swagger is supported by Smart Bear company. Under this website, there are tools which are commercial and open source as well. We have used Swagger UI as part of our Spring Boot web application. We also saw what is Swagger Editor, and similarly we have other kind of tools available inside the Swagger. Let me share few interesting details about this Swagger Codegen. Inside your Swagger Editor, whenever you give the details about your REST APIs, there is an option to generate the client code for your consumer developers. Suppose if someone is trying to consume your REST service using Java language, they can click on this Java, and the Swagger code generator tool is going to generate a client code based upon the REST APIs, based upon the operation names, validations. They'll get a good amount of code which they can use to get started. Similarly, there are other languages supported like Go, Ruby, Python. So in future, whenever you're trying to provide documentation for your REST APIs, please let your consumers also, they can get started quickly with the help of this generate client option. And in some scenarios, there are certain organizations where they first develop the OpenAPI specification, but not the REST APIs, which means they will first document their REST APIs using these standards. For these kind of scenarios, they can generate the server-side code also with the help of these options that we have here. So OpenAPI specification and Swagger is a very big subject. I try to provide good amount of information that help you to get started and to use these standards inside your Spring Boot web applications. If you want to learn everything about Swagger and OpenAPI specification, I do have a course inside Udemy. Inside the Udemy, if you can search for OpenAPI, you can see my course is top rated. And if you can click on this course, this is a very detailed course with 8.5 hours, and it covers everything about OpenAPI specification and Swagger tools. Regardless if you are a Java developer or Python developer or JavaScript developer, regardless of your programming language and the framework that you use, this course is going to teach you everything about OpenAPI specification and Swagger. So please enroll the same if you are interested to learn more details about Swagger and OpenAPI specification. Before I close the video, I just wanted to share the GitHub repo information. So this is the GitHub repo where I have uploaded the sample Maven project along with the important links that we have discussed. I'm going to mention this GitHub repo inside the description of the video. I hope you now have clear understanding about OpenAPI, Swagger UI, and how to document your REST APIs that you have built with the help of Spring Boot framework. Thank you. And before closing the video, please like the video and subscribe the video if you like the content, and that will be a great encouragement for me. Thank you and bye.